Welcome to the Better Together podcast, where we look at ways that we can come together and minister better, how we can help each other be more effective as we serve the Lord. And so today we have Dr. Sarah Bracey who is with us. Dr. Bracey is the psychology program coordinator at Welch College, as well as the campus counselor. She has a PhD in counselor education and supervision from Cumberland University. She is also a licensed professional counselor in the state of Tennessee, and she serves on the National Association of Free Will Baptist Denominational Research Committee. She and her husband Matthew live in Mount Juliet, Tennessee, and they attend Sylvan Park Free Will Baptist Church. So welcome, Sarah Bracey. It's so glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I notice here you are a counselor, a college counselor. You've also done some work with like Burnout and so forth. So talk to us a bit about that.
Well, I think that anyone who's working in ministry has probably struggled at some point or another with burnout or potential burnout. And so one of the things that I like to do is just help educate on what burnout looks like and some of the warning signs that come with it, some of the effects of burnout, and just how to prevent it from happening in the future if it does happen.
Very good. So what are some of the warning signs of burnout?
Well, typically what I say is that the plates that you've been spinning begin to fall.
Yes.
And, you're trying to cover things in a lot of different areas, but you're not necessarily stewarding your responsibilities well, and because there's too many of them. And so one of the things with burnout is you'll also see just some emotional signs of being frustrated and maybe quick to anger, but also spiritual signs too include just giving up or not having time for devotions and prayer and personal time with the Lord. And so some of these signs, when you start to see multiple ones over and over again, it's usually a good indication that you're on the road to burnout.
So ministry is not fun anymore. We're not really enjoying what we're doing, maybe feeling quite ineffective, like it's not kind of working out for us. And are there some folks that might be more susceptible to burnout than others?
Yes. Sometimes it's personality. There are some personalities who may be a little bit more susceptible. One of the things I like to talk about is how some people are racehorses and some people are turtles. And you can't expect a turtle to run the race of a racehorse, and you can't expect a racehorse to slow down. And so I'm married to a racehorse, and I happen to be a turtle, so I know this pretty well.
I'm going to tell him next time you're a horse, buddy. So, but he is a racehorse, isn't he?
He is. And so, but for me, he knows that if he tries to hurry me along, I tend to get burnout a lot quicker.
Yes.
And so sometimes it's personality. Sometimes it's just how you've learned to cope with stress in your life. And some people cope better than others.
Yes.
So there's a lot of different things that could possibly lead to who's more susceptible.
That's good. And people that are more susceptible, like wanting to please others, definitely puts a person at risk in the ministry, and probably even like having a shame orientation, people feeling like they're not ever quite right or never quite got it. So it's real important for folks in the ministry, isn't it, to just examine themselves, look at their lives, and see what their personality is like and so forth.
And also if they have coping techniques and support, if they've got support at home, that makes a big difference.
Yes. So let's talk about that a bit. What kind of coping techniques are helpful in preventing and then even helping people that are experiencing burnout?
Well, one coping technique that I'm a big fan of is just relaxation, deep breathing, meditation, spending time in silence. I think that is something that's undervalued in our world. And so just being able to unplug from technology is a big one, because sometimes people distract themselves with technology, but those problems are always there when you come back to it.
So maybe taking like a cell phone vacation where you're not looking at your cell phone for a little bit, going to a place that's quiet, maybe a lake or whatever, or a park, and spending some time there. Now, I know there's probably some ministry leaders out there, and I will admit this is happened to me twice. 2 times I did not answer the phone, and both times someone had died. Now, the Lord worked that out, and we got through that. So one of them was a terrible tragedy, and the person texted and said, "This is what's happened. The person's drowned, and this is where it's happened at." And it was actually more helpful because I could just go to that site. So we probably want our ministry leaders to know that the Lord's going to really provide. He's going to know that if that's the time you've got to kind of cut things off a bit. But any advice on that? Because it is true, we ministry leaders get called in the middle of the night for some really bad things often, and sometimes feel like we really can't unplug. What can we do about all of that?
Well, I think that you really need to delegate and to have a great leadership team that can sort of fill in when you need to take that time away. And if you don't have that, looking at, possibly deacons in the church, but just also understanding that it's not all on your shoulders, and that the Lord may bring forward someone who can step in at that time. And, you shouldn't feel false shame or false guilt because you needed to step away and couldn't be there immediately.
That's good. So we know that we've got to have time away. We've got to be able to have those breaks and so forth. And we can see in Scripture, the Lord himself is doing that, going off to quiet places from time to time and making that happen. So you mentioned earlier about spending time praying to the Lord, spending time in the Word. And there's actually some good data out there, isn't there, showing that pastors especially that do pray and that do spend time in the Word are less susceptible to burnout. What are some other things they can do to prevent or to help themselves get out of burnout, if you will?
I think once you realize that you are burnout, especially if those feelings of frustration, you've lost the desire to, preach or go to church even, that once you're at that point, you need to start pruning where you can. And it's sort of like triage, and realizing that you're going to have to take a step back somewhere in some way. And also getting the support of a spouse or accountability partner, someone who can come alongside you and sort of give you the support that you need at that time. But that's where I would start, is just sort of pruning where you can.
Okay. And so the Scripture's pretty clear on what ministry leaders are to do, and sometimes I read the passage where we got our deacons from, where there were widows that were complaining, and I fear that we would be doing that same work today. So I think I hear you saying prune back the things that I'm not required to do, or even the things I'm not supposed to be doing. Maybe cut back on those things, and that's where we look for helpers, deacons, and so forth, and get concentrated on spending our time in the Word and in prayer. And it sounds like that's a way to kind of to come back and help there as well then.
And sometimes it's about reestablishing boundaries that you've kind of let go. And that can be very difficult to do, but it's going to be better for you in the long run if you kind of establish those boundaries from the beginning. But sometimes we let them go over time, and it's about just sort of redefining what is in your scope and what's maybe not so necessary.
So can we talk a little bit about that? What are some boundaries we might need to set up, or what are some examples of where those boundaries get blurred a bit?
Well, boundaries especially get blurred in the church as it relates to being available. And obviously we do expect a certain amount of availability from our pastors. But if our pastor is bivocational, that may not necessarily always be an option. And so I think each pastor needs to decide for themselves, are they going to be available for every funeral? Are they going to be available for hospital visitations and things like that? And establish that.
So kind of think that through in a balance. And it's difficult, like when one's in a parsonage right there by the church, and then what are the things that absolutely are expected of me. And it's probably also good to have these conversations with the leaders, and they can often talk about that with folks within the church. And sometimes people have to take sabbaticals. Well, we don't hear about that as much in our movement, but when folks are really burned out, sometimes that's what's got to happen to get them back into good shape. Let's talk about preventing burnout. Are there any things that we might be able to do helping us be active in different ways that might make us less susceptible to burnout?
Well, I think it's really about just sort of setting good habits from the beginning. This can be difficult for, I think, young pastors who are first starting out to sort of establish that for themselves. But setting good habits as far as their devotions, their spiritual lives, setting aside that time, but also talking with their spouses on what they expect, what they see their church life looking like, their involvement, and because sometimes the spouse may have different expectations too, and that can put pressure on a pastor. And so just talking about that, communicating that from the beginning with the church, and with your leadership, I think can be helpful.
So you mentioned the spouse of a pastor, which sometimes people expect the pastor's wife to do this or to do that, can have some unrealistic expectations of them and even their children, kind of living in a fishbowl situation. So what you're saying is, let's reestablish those boundaries. It's best on the front end to do that as well. And also, I sense you're getting at they need to have time for themselves, the pastor and his wife, and even the pastor just for himself, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, we alluded to your husband earlier. I know he's a runner, so it's probably a good idea for folks in the ministry to have some kind of physical outlet, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
Let's talk a bit about that. What are some good ways they can use those outlets to deal with stress?
Well, I think that just to have good mental health overall, everyone needs to participate in some form of exercise and take care of themselves physically. But for my husband, running has definitely become his physical exercise as well as his hobby.
Yes.
And hobbies are good too to have. I know that we rarely talk about hobbies, but they can be an appropriate outlet for releasing stress.
So it's, for him, running is a hobby. It's also probably a good stress reliever. For some people, it might be taking care of their yard or doing the garden or walking the dog. But everyone needs something that helps them stay active and trying to have at least 10,000 steps a day, but something that keeps them moving around. And you're saying it's a good thing for a hobby. It could be a hobby like fishing or golfing or whatever, but you need something that kind of help you to replenish and to feel better and so forth as well, don't we?
Absolutely.
Well, good. Well, you've given us a lot to think about, Dr. Bracey, as we consider things we might do to avoid burnout. Sometimes it can get so bad that people actually need counseling, don't they? How would one go about doing that?
Well, I think that a lot of counseling takes place in a non-professional environment. You have a lot of people that you probably are surrounded by who could give you good counsel.
Yes.
And so I think that that's where a lot of people start first. But sometimes, you may need something more than that. And so if you are considering professional counseling, a lot of healthcare plans now offer mental health insurance, and so that's an option. Or you can just look into finding a Christian counseling practice somewhere nearby that you could go to.
Very good, very good. So you're saying a lot of it, though, would be informal. So especially in a ministry setting, it would probably be a good idea for a pastor to find someone else that they could talk to. And probably needs to be someone that's in a situation or has been a situation like they find themselves presently in, one step up. So they used to be in a church about this size with a similar staff situation, and now they're here and kind of where you want to go. So it's not just willy-nilly anyone that they would look to for something like that. It's someone that's kind of got a little bit more going on that could be a good sounding board, wouldn't they?
I think everyone should have a mentor. And also, everyone should be a mentee. And so I think it's good to have someone who's older, who's a little bit more experienced in the ministry that you can talk to about things, as well as mentoring someone younger than you as well.
That's good. So like if you're a younger person, you're looking for a mentor and you find someone a little bit older, a little bit further along. There are probably some older ministers listening that may feel burned out. The answer for Elijah was to mentor Elisha. And so sometimes you can't get a mentor for yourself, perhaps at your particular spot in the ministry, but you could mentor someone else, which ends up helping you out as well as helping someone else out too, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by and being with us today, and we certainly appreciate your ministry and the good work you're doing, and we wish you well as you continue on, Dr. Bracey.
Thank you. Appreciate it.